Alright, so today we're going to be talking about cards that desperately need a reprint. Now there's different cards on this list that I compiled. There's cards that are actually also banned. There's cards that are from older formats, and they are all really good in their respective formats. But another thing they have in common is the fact that their price shouldn't be at the point where it's at. And some of them became that expensive because they only have one printing. Some of them have multiples, but maybe none that are quite recent. So we're going to be talking about all of these cards, and hopefully we see some reprints soon because I feel like we are in dire need of them. And if you have any of your thoughts about cards that should get a reprint, please feel free to share them in the comments down below. Also like the video, ding the bell so you are notified every single time I post. Make sure you are subbed, and yeah, share the video with your friends. Let me know your thoughts, and let's go ahead and get started. So the first card is from Edison format. Actually, we have different cards today from multiple different formats, and the first one is going to be Substitute. Substitute is such a cool card for Edison format, and with so much hype surrounding the format, the price just went up. And why is it that the card only had one printing from 2008 in Light of Destruction, and then no more printings? I feel like this shouldn't be the case, because even if a card was banned, then it became limited in TCG Advanced, it still should have gotten a reprint. Like I said, there's a lot of hype surrounding older formats right now, and I feel like people shouldn't have to pay like 30 euros for 3 copies, because even though it's limited here, you can of course play 3 in Edison format. And it's such a pivotal part of some of the strategies in that format that I personally think it should get a reprint soon, especially because it came from the ban list and never received the love it, in my opinion, deserved. And the next one on the list is actually still banned, and that's Chap Dust Shoot, and it's also very, very good in older formats. The card is nice, but for the most part, it's like sighted because it's not insane in late game when your opponent maybe doesn't have as many resources anymore. And nevertheless, it is busted and it's rightfully banned, but I still feel like the card should have multiple printings. The only ones are commons, because we're not talking about the super rare. The super rare doesn't exist, it's not real. But as for the commons, you probably shouldn't have to spend like 15 or 16 euros so you can get it, at least in my opinion. And still staying on topic of banned cards, there's even a couple more on this list, but the next one is going to be Masterpiece. So Masterpiece is still banned, and it is known as probably one of the most oppressive monsters in its respective format, and it only got the one printing, the one secret rare version from Maximum Crisis, and then it got banned, and they just never really wanted to give it a reprint, I guess. But it is still about 22 euros. And I understand when the deck came out, of course you had to spend for Diagram, you had to spend for Masterpiece. It was a secret rare from the set. But right now, I think, especially if it gets unbanned at some point in the future, if you unban it, then the hype is going to be just insane. And that kind of spike post ban list can only be avoided by giving it a printing soon. Because like another card that got a reprint while it was still banned is actually the next one on the list, and we'll discuss later what happened to that card, but I like the incentive behind printing cards even if they are banned, because people want to play older formats. So I most definitely think a card like Masterpiece should get a reprint, and the one I already alluded to is a card that actually the player base was super excited when it got a reprint in Legendary Collection Kaiba Corp. Now you probably know I'm talking about the Delinquent Duo, and of course we were hyped because it got a rarity upgrade, but if you look at the Delinquent Duo then, if you were smart, you snatched up some copies because it wasn't expensive, and right now it's about 15 or 16 euros. And I'm talking about almost every single printing, the price is pretty much the same. Some older ones are probably even more expensive, and of course it makes sense. But I think cards like these, especially where they are just monumental cards when you're talking about retro format, should get some kind of special treatment. I feel like we should have a ton of accessible copies. Like I said before, I won't repeat myself, people just want to play for fun. They don't want to spend 300 euros to build an Edison deck or to build a gold deck. And if you don't have cards from back then, especially even if you have them, you probably had them when you were a kid and now they're like round. So I feel like we should be treated well. We should have reprints of cards that are probably lying in someone's basement right now, just unplayable. Yeah, that's pretty much my take on old cards and the reprints they have to get. Now I promise we have some current cards on this list, but this next one is the last one among the older ones, and it's going to be Absolute Zero. Now if you look at Edison format, Absolute Zero is probably one of, if not the coolest, like, fusions and even extra deck monsters overall in that format, because it's so good in many different decks, and it's so hard to deal with if it's played against you. Back then the rules weren't the same when we're talking about the 2020 revisions, when stuff doesn't trigger anymore. Back then Absolute Zero triggered everywhere. It just triggered. So it was just annoying, like I said, to deal with. And you also played 3 copies. You had the space, and why wouldn't you? You could summon them. And if you look at the price right now, it is kind of annoying that you have to spend like 10 euros or even more if you want to play 3 copies. So you're spending like 40 euros basically for a portion of your extra deck if you're trying to play older formats. And it did get a reprint in Battles of Legend Heroes Revenge, which again, cool incentive. I like this, but this was some years back. And right now, if they see the hype surrounding Edison format and all of the older formats just overall, I feel like they should put even more thought into reprints, because they did that. You know, some cards were at an insane price point, they got reprints, so I feel like these cards on this list should be treated the same. And moving on, you know, we're sort of switching gears. We're gonna talk about the current format and some of the cards that are really impactful even right now, even if they're not like recently printed. One of them is going to be Sphere Mode, because Sphere Mode is just such a useful side deck card, especially in the correct format. It just it puts in work, to say the least. But it's around 10 euros. Any printing you look at, you're gonna have to spend about 10 to like 12 euros for 1 copy, and the card is really good. So if you have to play it in a deck that can afford to do it, if you play that kind of deck in that format, you're gonna have to spend the money. And in my opinion, staples overall should be much more accessible so everybody can acquire them and everyone has the same chance. Like I said, Sphere Mode is just really strong, and another card that's very useful, especially right now, and it was in the past format, also strong, also at a very high price tag, is Kurikara. And again, we're on the topic of staples having to be accessible. I get that Kurikara was quite recently printed, but when it comes to Power of the Elements, no reprints were announced for the Megatins. Now that's probably because they will use some cards from the Power of the Elements set to push other reprint sets, which makes sense. That's fine. I do think Kurikara is going to get a reprint sometime in the future, but again, I think staples should be accessible to everyone, at least to the point where you spend like 5 or 6 euros or something for a copy. Like, thinking about that, Sphere Mode is not as bad if you compare it to Kurikara, but I still feel like both of them should be treated the same way, just getting a reprint and being much more accessible. Kurikara was like less than 10 euros probably when it dropped, so you could also turn it around and say, you know, if you didn't get it back then, it's on you, which I understand to a degree, but still, you know, it just should get a reprint. Let's just be real. And moving on to another card that's also an amazing card is Pot of Prosperity. And I will give the credit, it got a couple reprints, but I still feel like it is pretty much a staple at this point. I get that not every single deck can play it, but when it can, the difference is it's really like night and day. Playing Prosperity in a deck versus not playing it because you can't afford it or you don't want to invest into it or whatever your reason is, the difference is there. You can dig for your resources, you can get going second cards when you're going second, you can get engine, you can just, like, the consistency, everything when it comes to Prosperity, just, it's a very good card. And again, I feel like that these kinds of cards should have multiple printings so more people can acquire them. And moving on to the next card, I wanted to talk about Borreload Savage Dragon in this video as well, because it was one of those cards that didn't get a reprint for a very long time. The price tag was kind of insane. It became almost like a meme. People were pissed that it doesn't have a reprint yet. Then it got a reprint, which is all fine, but it's also quite kind of recent, so I get that it might not make sense that I'm pushing for a reprint, but here's the but. I feel like extra deck staples should be quite accessible as well, and they did take steps in the right direction in my opinion. They reprinted cards like Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, or like cards that are just, you know, staples and just overall good, and you kind of have to have them in your binder, have them ready for when the time inevitably comes when you're going to be using them. And I think Savage should fall in the same category. Right now it's about 15 to 16 euros, which is not horrible for an extra deck card, but in the last format it was played in Super Heavy Samurai, and the extra deck had like Baron, Access Code, Exosynchro Dragon, all of these cards, and you just don't want to spend a ton of money for an extra deck. And it really comes down to the person. Like, if you want to spend, I don't know, 20 euros for a Savage, sure, but I think that it should be a bit more accessible, so yeah. And then moving on to the last card, I wanted to talk about the price card actually. Chaos Emperor Dragon, the Armageddon one, the Pendulum one, the price card. It's kind of weird, right? The card gets a printing, so it's more accessible to the general public, but it only gets one. And the players were really excited because it was useful in Dragon Link and those types of decks. It even saw play last year in some versions of Draco Slayer, but it's like 50 euros because it only had one reprint after it was a price card. And I feel like these kinds of cards should be, again, I'm using the expression of, they should be treated better by giving them more reprints so people can actually play them, because I don't think realistically you're gonna be like, okay, you know, this card is like a really cool extender, I'll just spend 50 or 60 euros because I want to. Some people will be like that. Not most of them though, so I think this is the card that should round off today's list. I do think it should get a reprint soon. And yeah, among all of the cards on the list, let me know which one you think is the most needed for a reprint. And if you like this video, please make sure to like it. It lets me know that you enjoy that type of content. And like I said before, hopefully we see some of these reprints soon. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.